the co-founder, chief product officer of Airbnb. Please welcome Joe Gebbia. Welcome, Joe.
Good morning.
Have a seat right here.
Thank you.
So before we begin, how many of you have experienced Airbnb?
Oh my God, thank you so much.
Nice. How many of you have hosted? So we got a dozen or so people out there. For people who haven't experienced, I'm sure pretty much everyone knows it, Joe, but give us the elevator pitch.
Well, Airbnb is a new way to travel. It's a way to experience cities the way that locals do. At the neighborhood level, seeing a city through the eyes of how a local sees a city through the eyes of a resident. I think one of the beautiful things that I hear about guests when they use our service is this little subtle detail. They tell us how much they appreciate being able to go to the local grocery store. Right? It's like we give people access to neighborhoods that they previously never had access to before, and they start to discover the nuances and the actual what's the cultural fabric of that city all about. And
when you set out to build this with, I think, a couple other co-founders, what was the intention? What did you actually think you were building?
So the background is, it was now 7 years ago. My roommate Brian and I were living in San Francisco, not too far from where we are right now. And we quit our jobs to become entrepreneurs. We knew that we wanted to do something. We didn't know what the big idea was.
Sounds like the quintessential San Francisco story so far.
Kind of, right? So we kind of take this leap into the unknown, and we think, well, we'll come up with some big idea together. But ironically, that very same week, we get this letter in the mail from our landlord telling us that our rent is going up. And suddenly we have a huge math problem on our hands. Our rent is here and our income is here. And we have literally days to figure out how to solve this problem. So that coming weekend, we noticed that the hotels in San Francisco were completely sold out because of a design conference that was coming to the city. And we thought, well, we have this extra space in our apartment. Designers need a place to stay. Why don't we throw up some airbeds in the living room and we could host people in our apartment? And we thought, well, gosh, we'll cook breakfast for them. We'll pick them up from the airport. We'll give them a map to the city. We'll cook breakfast. And by the end of that night, we had this idea of airbed and breakfast.
And it was actually an air mattress or something. Is that right, that people were sleeping on?
We put an airbed in the living room, and then we got clever. We realized there was room for 2 more airbeds. So we ran to Bed Bath & Beyond. We got some more airbeds. Before we knew it, we had 3 people sleeping in our living room. Kat, Amol, and Michael completely blew away our assumptions of who might sleep in someone's living room on an airbed. They were all over the age of 30. Kat was a solo female traveler from Boston. Amol was from India. And Michael was a 45-year-old husband and family man sleeping on an air mattress in her living room. And I think,
I'm sure he did something bad to deserve that.
He had the time of his life. We took him around San Francisco. We introduced him to our friends in the design world. And they really saw the city through a whole new lens. And in fact, one of our guests, Catherine, said she wanted to move here after her experience with us, and 6 months later she did. Yeah. And I think, I'll never forget saying goodbye to them at the top of the steps and thinking, we just made 3 friends, we saved our apartment, we made $1,000 in cash, but something bigger transpired. And we couldn't put our finger on it exactly. We just felt that there was something special that happened when you invite 3 people into your home. Yeah. And I have to tell you, it was never meant to be a business. This was a weekend project to make rent. Yeah. We actually put this on the back burner and said, okay, now let's go think of the big idea.
So 7 years later, it's been a very long weekend. Tell us where you are now. Give us what is Airbnb?
Well, it's gone.
I mean, from a statistic, where you are in terms of the number of beds, the number of people, whatever the metrics are.
We've had tens of millions of guests at this point. There's now an Airbnb host in virtually every country on the planet. And the one thing I've learned about all this is how global hospitality is as a concept. Yeah. I've traveled to India, to Europe, to South America, Central America, other parts of Asia. And every host I've ever stayed with, I've stayed with about 200 Airbnb hosts at this point, has been so welcoming, so greeting, and they don't know who I am, by the way. I usually travel without putting my title in.
Just Joe Traveler.
Just Joe Traveler, exactly. So I get an authentic experience, and I've stayed on boats in the Seine River. I've stayed in tree houses. I've stayed in apartments in Seoul. I actually stayed with a Japanese monk in a Buddhist temple in southern Japan one time.
Yeah.
It's like when you put a platform out into the world, I think the other thing we've learned is how powerful it can be. You see the creativity that people have when you put a platform out like that. You see people we actually have over 1,000 boats that you can stay in all over the world.
Yeah. So one of the interesting things about the sharing economy, of which Airbnb is decidedly a part, in fact, one of the iconic companies, is that the environmental community, the clean tech community, sort of claim you all as their own. This is an example of clean tech, or any number of other terms that are used around that. Do you feel that you're part of the clean and green economy, and how do you think about Airbnb through an environmental lens?
You know, we've never really talked about it until recently, actually. We've kind of known in the background that it's there, but we've never been able to kind of quantify it or put numbers around it. I think there's just a general principle of inspiring people to be more resourceful with the things that we have. It's kind of like when Brian and I had that aha moment in our apartment 7 years ago. It wasn't that we had to go out and acquire new things in order to get this off the ground. It was like, let's repurpose the things that we already have. Actually, we did have to get 2 new airbeds. But other than that, it was how do we look around our lives and look at the idle assets, the things that are sitting underutilized, and make better use of them. I feel like that right there, that line is the premise of the sharing economy.
Right.
It's like somebody who has matched with somebody who wants, and we can do that now faster than we've ever seen before, thanks to things like mobile and better trust mechanisms on the internet.
But how would you measure this environmentally? Have you done that?
We did. We worked with a third party this past year to start to quantify and put some numbers behind it.
What'd you find?
I don't have the numbers on the top of my head, but we did find that on the average, Airbnb guests use less water, produce less waste, and use less energy than, say, traditional accommodations.
Is that because they're staying in someone's home and they're more respectful than when you're staying in a nice hotel where you just sort of think that, oh, I'm spending the money, I'll do what I want? Why do you think that is?
I think there is, think about when you stay with a friend and you stay in their home, that kind of perspective you have and that sense of responsibility.
So you haven't put numbers to how much energy or water or anything else? You don't yet know that?
We have some numbers. I don't know on the top of my head.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to hear those. I think the world, the community, certainly in the environmental clean tech would love to know that so that they can actually back up some of the things that they've been claiming just sort of willy-nilly without any actual evidence. So I would encourage you to do that. What have you learned about disrupting an industry? I mean, you have, the hotel and hospitality industry has been shaken kind of by this. In fact, I think I've heard this statistic, and again, I don't know whether it's true, but that Airbnb, by virtue of the number of rooms you have, is the fastest growing or the biggest hotel chain in the world. Is there some truth to that?
I think that, let's back up real quick. I'm a little bit averse to the term disruptor because I feel like it sets it up like in order to be disruptive, somebody has to win and somebody has to lose, and we certainly don't see it like that. I think the way that we think about it is if you have a pie chart of available accommodations in the city, it's not that we're slicing into a piece of the pie. It's actually we're adding accommodations to a city to make the pie bigger, right? We're adding different types of accommodations in different areas of cities where traditional accommodations don't even exist. And it's also our type of traveler tends to stay longer than they do in the traditional accommodations. It's usually people staying for 5, 6, 7 nights. Sublets is actually a huge thing that's taking off for us right now in terms of people staying 30 days or more on Airbnb.
But that's, if you weren't disrupting anything, you wouldn't be controversial. And in some cities, in San Francisco, for example, there's some conflict going on. And part of that is that you may be encouraging homeowners to take rentable properties off the market so that they can make more money using Airbnb. And it's not just Airbnb, there are other competitors who shall remain unnamed, at least for now. So is there a responsibility, a social responsibility for a company like Airbnb to make sure that that doesn't happen, that there's fair housing and affordable housing available?
Yeah, I think, we believe Airbnb makes cities more affordable for more families.
How so?
Well, the majority of our hosts rent the home that they live in, so they aren't actually taking housing off the market. In fact, they're using that income to stay in their home and to pay their bills. We did a survey in San Francisco of our hosts, and we found that 75% use their income to stay in their home and make ends meet. And we do care about this. So we did talk to some short-term rental housing experts, and they tell us that short-term rentals don't have a material impact on rising rents. And when we look at our own site, the number of listings we have is really just too small, I think, to have a meaningful impact on housing prices.
So is this controversy, as I called it, overblown? Is that not really a big thing for you, or is it an issue?
I think it makes a nice headline. So, but I mean,
But you didn't answer my question.
Well, look at how Airbnb started. We did it as a way to help make rent, right? And I think that's the spirit of the site, and that's what the majority of our hosts are doing.
So where does this go from here? I mean, so many of the sharing economies start with one thing, or not just sharing economy. Amazon is a perfect example, maybe the ultimate example that starts with one thing, and it spins out into things beyond what they originally, products and services they originally started in. Where does Airbnb go from here? Is it just more? At some point, I would imagine you would plateau in terms of the growth or the number of available beds. What happens next?
Well, I think what's been really inspiring for us is to see how the concept has been propagated to other industries and other categories, right? So I've heard of the Airbnb of fill in the blank for just about everything, from bikes to cars to dogs. There's actually Airbnb for dogs. You can rent dogs for the weekend. It's actually kind of a brilliant idea. If you're traveling and you don't want to put your dog into a kennel, you can leave it with another dog owner and dog lover. So people are taking the concept, the principles of like, well, I have something and somebody else wants it. How do we connect those together? So I think it's really interesting for us to watch and kind of see where the sort of categories emerge.
And so maybe those are some that you jump into?
Potentially. I'll share one other one that I came across. So when I travel the world, there's literally thousands of sharing economy companies that have sprung up in cities around the world. So when I'm in Europe, they all kind of, we all get together and we all meet. The most interesting one was when I was in Seoul. I met one of the founders of a sharing economy company for business suits. Because in Seoul, the culture is if you go to a job interview, you need to have a really nice suit. Right. But it's sort of a catch-22. If you don't have a job, you can't get a nice suit. So there's actually a service where you can find great, really high-quality business suits.
Okay. That's interesting. Let's take a question from Elaine.
One of the questions is how you feel like technology is really upending business models related to kind of let me see, how did they phrase it? Maximizing the use of underutilized assets and providing experience-rich opportunities and empowering customers and companies to make decisions and educate others. It's kind of a big question.
Kind of a big question. Let me see if I can break that down. For us and what we see through our perspective on technology and how it's evolved is there's a couple key things. Two things. The first is mobile, and the second is trust. There's more mobile devices in people's pockets around the world than ever before, right? And actually, the third thing would be the cost to get an idea off the ground. So the first thing is mobile. Second thing is trust, and the third thing that I would add to this answer is that it's never been as possible to get an idea off the ground as it is right now. The distribution mechanisms to get an app into a store and to develop an app to begin with have never been as cheap as they are today.
But an app doesn't make a company. There needs to be a lot behind that, as you've shown.
Yeah, an idea has to start somewhere, and I feel like that kind of going from 0 to 1 of getting an idea out into the world has never been easier in the course of history than it is right now. The fact that there are platforms in all of our pockets, in billions of pockets around the world. And second on top of that is that you can kind of look at the history of the internet to piece how we got to where we are today. That like the first decade of the internet, the 90s, was all about how do we get people to the internet? And that's when you saw solutions like AOL and CompuServe and other things. And then it was kind of like the next decade of the internet, the 2000s, was now that we have this critical mass of people coming to the internet, they now have broadband, what can we give them to do when they're there? So social networks, let's let them share videos, share photos, et cetera. And now I feel like we're hitting this kind of third decade of the internet, which is we have this critical mass of people who've created all these connections online, and we have this new form which to consume the internet, which is transferring back offline. Like Airbnb couldn't have happened 10 years ago because those pieces weren't in place. And so there's been this evolution of mobile, of trust, of reducing the cost to get ideas off the ground. that make things like this possible.
Well, part of what we're doing here this next few days is to look at where technology might take us next and how to harness that in the ways that you've done so successfully over the past 7 years to take this an idea to build great value and great service. So thank you so much for showing the way. Please join me in thanking Joe Gebbia.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Joe.
Very good.
Thanks.